I'd like both of them to respond to it. We'd like to know, do you think consumers need a trusted one label for agriculture?
Do I think consumers need a trusted label for agriculture? I do think people are looking. They are looking for food producers that share their values. So I don't want people to think that because I said ethics doesn't count, and then, you know, Greg said ethics is important, that they were conflicting messages. They're actually the same message. That the shared values are so apparent that people buy those, they trust those, and then they also have those perceptions of better taste and better quality. I think I don't know that there's a loss of... I do think the community is becoming wary. I don't think Australian farmers have lost trust to the same extent that they had in the UK. I do think people are looking for things that indicate trust, and I do think they're struggling to find it and going to this ethical space as the area where that's where they're looking for it at the moment, for whatever reason.
Maybe.
Qualified, yes, maybe.
Yeah, I'm in the maybe space too, because I think there is some value in it. There's some other ways of achieving it, potentially. So then it becomes a cost-benefit analysis as to whether it's best and that. Given perhaps when Red Tractor started, we've got a lot more developed brands that already have quite amount of value in that space. So to give up that value to generate new value for that marginal gain is a very expensive process to do that sort of thing. I'm definitely in the maybe space, but I very much applaud having this discussion to have those questions asked sort of thing. It's not a yes or no, it's a cost-benefit analysis as to can we, and I think Andrew might have mentioned the really critical word is fit for purpose. What are you actually trying to do with the label? And I see a lot of industry certification schemes that start out in food safety, add a bit of animal welfare, and then add this, and effectively become industry compliance activities by default as well. So I think it's what's happening here today, that discussion around where's the reward for effort, where would you get benefit, where wouldn't you get benefit. One of the things in the industry I work with, we also try and have somewhat in the egg industry a minimalist standard, so that then leaves space for people to go above that to pick up market premium in the space sort of things. So there's all those issues that we definitely need to have a discussion about one label, but there's lots of things to think about, and that's what we're doing here today. So.
Thank you. Our question was saying if people know, because you can go to similar discussions, and if the industry experts are saying these are the identified issues, that, you know, there's a fundamental problem in that the way the industry is conducting itself. So if you know that the WASPs are targeting the government, whereas the consumers are saying this is we buy on emotion, we justify with logic later. So can you see a light at the end of the tunnel? If the farmers are improving their ethics and their quality and doing everything, the farmers are open to be, open. If the farming families have shared values to the people in the city buying it, but the disconnect is getting bigger between the understanding, do you see a light at the end of the tunnel that all the information you're getting out is getting listened to, and that perhaps there is that look at disruptive technologies such as social media, which you can get a lot more bang for your buck? I suppose that's what, at the moment, the key issue that you're identifying, even before the label. Do you see an improvement in the way the message is communicated to bring the shared values back together?
No, I want to come back to that one.
I think the key issue is around we need to learn how to better have the discussion, and we need to know who to have the discussion with, and we do actually have a lot of research in that space that's giving us some insight into that. There is no point talking to extremists and activists. Right? They're just so firm in their view, it's a waste of time. The person eating 40 kilos of beef a year is not our target audience either. It's the person in the middle, and that's why in the three trusted groups, the peer group that we mentioned, influential others, because there's a target group that has a lot of influence to the rest of society, which we can hit reasonably cheaply because they are online, They're typically female, and they're typically somewhat educated. And they're actually seen within their peer group as being people to listen to, sort of stuff. So there is strategies out there, but there is a fundamental shift that we have to move away from talking science to share those values. And I'm very comfortable that we have those. We just don't have the ability to talk about them.
I'd just like to briefly add on to that. I do think the message is starting to get through to agriculture or to science or to any of these sort of expert communities that the way we communicate with the non-expert community has to change. However, I do think it's changing too slowly. I do think that the people who need to change need the evidence and the willingness to actually go and get some evidence about what people are actually thinking and why, so that industry bodies, when they frame their communications, are not responding to perceptions of perceptions, is low, because it's not seen as greater pressing issue as other things that need investment. And so I think at the moment, unless we can actually prioritise this and create some sort of sense of urgency, it's going to happen too slowly. I think eventually we will have shared values along the chain within the community, but what is it going to take to actually make that a priority for people? That's the question for me. Do we have to lose social licence first is really the question in my head.
Are we basing this all on a flawed assumption? The assumption behind all this is that these added attributes come at a cost and the market's going to deliver the true cost of production. If we accept the fact that farming is not sustainably profitable, are we addressing the wrong issue?
I think that was my point.
I think that underpinning our type of work is that we don't quite often talk about needing to change agriculture. We need to change about how we talk about it, sort of thing. Like that's the fundamental issue where we are in this space, sort of thing. And like I'm tied up in welfare code reviews and that sort of stuff. Our industries have got to the point that there's not a lot of bad stuff that happens anymore. Like everything we've got to change is a trade-off, sort of thing. So fundamentally, I think agriculture can keep doing what it's doing and change as it has through other mechanisms and that sort of stuff. But through communication and that, we can stop that change being forced upon us. And that's what we're trying to get from the social licence context, in that we can make decisions, do what we want to, without the community forcing those things onto us, sort of thing. You know, I'm in the free range labelling review. They want to put 7 birds per square metre. There wouldn't be a farm in the country that could probably survive at that level. That's the sort of thing we actually want to stop, where that change is forced upon us. If we've got profit issues and finance issues and that sort of stuff, we want to be allowed to change those in our own way and not have our productions forced upon us by the ACCC and the perception law. Yep. But if you don't like that, that's farming, unfortunately, in some spaces, sort of thing. So they're two separate issues, I think, and not to be confused in places. Hey? Well, yeah, potentially. Yep.
I was interested when you said that Australian farmers are the most trusted in the Australian food production chain. How can that be reinforced, and how can that benefit outweigh the cost that would probably be forced upon the farming sector?
So that statistic came out of some work that's been done at Flinders University about trust in the food system, and they've actually published a whole series of studies around trust and food, but the researchers were sort of coming from a public health space, which was really interesting. In terms of how can that benefit be realised, is that was your question? How can you actually capitalise on this idea that farmers are the most trusted? I think you are. And this is part of, I think, the struggle that I have with these ideas is, how can you make money out of something that in some ways, if it's money, or how can you build on something that you already have? And really what you're trying to do is not lose it. That, I think, is is the thinking. It's not necessarily something you can add. You just have to make sure it's not taken away from you. And that's really, the thrust of, I think, the kind of things that Greg and I were saying. So I don't know if it's answered your question well enough, but that's where I think it is. It's actually making sure you maintain that level of trust. So, you already get the value of that, but it's making sure that the trust is not transferred to retailers or to others in the food chain, celebrity chefs, those kind of people. Yeah.
Yeah, essence of the issue, I think, is around how we get, like, where activists really kick our butt is they create communities and that sort of stuff, whereas agriculture typically relies on the one or two people in the communication department of their industry organisation to deal with the problem, right? And until we can actually change that, in that where once upon a time farmers' involvement would have been through the lobby, they would have went to the local Ag Force meeting and they would have went to the annual general meeting and all that sort of stuff. Involvement in agriculture now is about linking directly to your consumers and doing that in the right way. And particularly once people have a problem with your industry, and we've done some survey work on eggs, they really don't like you. If you're already coming from behind, it's terribly hard. And that's where the egg industry's at the moment. So it's get on the front foot, but actually create that community of farmers who have processes, one of which might be labelling, one might be social media, one might be, and then some of the research is actually showing that it's not the country-city divide. There'd be just as many people in Roma who think exactly the same as people do in Brisbane. There'd be a whole lot of farmers in this room who don't like battery cages. Right? There's farmers who don't like other farmers' practices. We keep talking about this rural-city divide. There is no such thing. So farmers can actually go and talk to the people at your tennis club, your P&C and all that sort of stuff, like do what you can where you are and then build up over time. But we need a community of agricultural people, and we need to embrace the people who aren't farmers, our agronomists, our vets and all that sort of stuff, so that discussion's actually happening, and perhaps convey some of that through a labelling at a point in sale.
Okay. Thank Greg and Heather. They're going to be here for the balance of the day. They're also going to be on the panels. It's time to break for lunch. We have half an hour for lunch. When you come back, without asking permission, please sit at a completely different table with a completely different bunch of people. Have fun.